Let's take a more in-depth look at adding shootable weapons by adding the assault rifle and the bow. In this video, I'm going to assume that you've already watched the item types and the items video. If you haven't watched it, go take a look at those videos first, because this video isn't really going to go over what we already learned in those videos. So I've taken the demo scene and I basically removed all the items from the character. You'll notice if I hit play, he's in first person and third person without any items. So let's go ahead and give this character an assault rifle, and we can do that from the item manager. Actually, let me clear my values. So now we can do it from the item manager. And for this, I'm going to kind of go over quickly since we've already been through it with the other video, but we are creating an assault rifle and we are assigning it to the character. We need to give the character some arms by dragging in that object, and the arms will animate with this first person demo animator. The actual visible item is the assault rifle, and that will be positioned under the arms. That's already been set up. So, and then the next thing that we want to do is give the animator controller for the assault rifle, and that's assault rifle. So now we need to basically do the same thing for third person. So there we go. And we almost got it. Now we just need to tell it that it should fire bullets, and now it's been added to the character. It's not positioned correctly, but when I hit play, we should at least see the assault rifle in the character's hand. And that looks good. So let's go ahead and position the assault rifle. And for this, I've sort of cheated, and I've already saved the values. So I'm going to do that for both first and third. And then I'm going to position the first person arms, and that is done under this main assault rifle component. And I'm going to cheat by looking up what these values are. So I'm setting the base spring offset for the position. And now when I hit play, after I get done setting this, we should see that the assault rifle is in the correct position for both first and third. Now when I fire, you'll notice that the first person springs do animate, but you don't actually see any real visual feedback. And let's go ahead and start adding that by first adding the muzzle flash and the shells. We can do that by going down to this first person shootable weapons or the third person shootable weapon properties, and then click on the fire point location, and that will bring us to this game object. This is the game object where the weapon actually fires from. So we want it to be at the end of the barrel. So that looks about right. The muzzle flash should spawn in a similar position, so I'm just going to copy that and paste those values. I want to do something, or I want to have the exact same values for first person, so I just copied those values and now I'm going to paste them. We can do this because the models are exactly the same. The shell eject point specifies the location where the shell ejects from, and it's hard to see with this white model, but that looks about right-ish. So now let's go ahead and copy those values and paste them in for third person. So now when I hit play, you'll notice that we don't see any change, but at least things are positioned properly. So now when we assign them, it should look good. We are now going to assign them under the shootable weapon, and notice the shootable weapon has this muzzle flash field, so let's go ahead and assign it a muzzle flash. And this is the correct muzzle flash. If we haven't created a muzzle flash yet, we can do so easily under the object manager, and then basically it just asks you for a name, what type of item, and then if a game object's required, and then it will create the prefab for you. So it's really easy to create new objects if they aren't already created, and that will set all the components for you that you need for that particular object type. But in this case, I just want to reuse the ones that I already have, so I just assigned the muzzle flash and the shell. Now when this spawns, it will use the same objects for both first and third person. You could actually change that if you really wanted to between different versions by using this states or setting a different state, but having the same muzzle flash for both first and third works well for our purposes. So now when I hit play, you'll notice that we have a muzzle flash, and then Let's look. Yeah, so you can see the shell as well. If I go to third person, it's a little bit easier to see the shell ejecting. So that's a good start. What we want to change next is I could only fire one at a time, so we want it to be a full auto fire mode. So now when I hold down the mouse button, it should keep firing. So there we go, that looks a lot better. You'll notice that when I hit the R button, he doesn't actually reload. And the reason for that is because I need to give him more ammo. If I go to my default loadout, I'll give him a lot of ammo. And then we can see under the assault rifle properties that the clip size, I think, is 50 by default. Let's see, under reload, yeah, clip size is 50 by default. So before he wasn't able to reload since he didn't have anything to reload with. But now after I fire a bit, we should see that he reloads. He does not remove that clip, and we can have that clip be removed by assigning it under this perspective properties. These first-person shootable weapon properties and third-person shootable weapon properties are specific to that perspective. So anytime that you need to assign something to a specific perspective, it will be within these perspective properties. So in this case, we need to assign the reloadable clip, and that is this clip game object. And then we need to also assign this attachment, and this attachment is what object gets or the clip gets assigned to when it's reloading. So when he's reloading the clip, it gets assigned to his left hand. So we need to find the character's left hand, and we'll need to do that for both first and third person. So let me drill down here a little bit, and there's his left hand. So now this, oh, actually I was using the wrong perspective in this case. So this was the third person character's left hand, but we really want the first person character's left hand. So I need to do that again by finding that object, and then assigning it. So now we have the correct left hand. Let's go ahead and do something similar for third. We'll first drag in the clip, and then we'll assign what object it's attached to. So now when we hit play, and then we need to reload, the clip wasn't actually removed. And let's see the reason for that. Let's see. Those look good. Let's see, under reload, we need to, click this reload, detach, attach clip. Now hopefully it will reload. There we go, perfect. So now we can do that in both first and third person. So now that we've done that, we pretty much have the assault rifle complete, except let's go ahead and do one more thing and add a UI to it. So the icon will be the assault rifle, and then the center crosshairs, let's see, will be center, and then we have a left and a right, and top and bottom as well. So we'll go ahead and quickly assign that. So now when I hit play, we should see that there is a crosshairs and the item indicator shows the assault rifle. So good. So now we also have a crosshairs. Let's add the bow item now that we've added the assault rifle. The bow has a really similar setup as the assault rifle, except it has a few extra steps because of the always visible projectile, so it'll be good to go through that. To get started, like always, we go through this item manager. You should be getting very familiar with the item manager now. And under the name, we'll put bow. It's going to have a bow item type, and we're going to assign it to the Nolan character. Within the animator controller, it has a unique ID of 4, so we'll go ahead and assign that. And you'll notice how the item manager automatically filled in these first-person arms. It searched through the Nolan character and found these arms and set them as the default value. If you wanted to use a different set of arms instead of the ones that we're using for the assault rifle, you could go ahead and switch it out. but in this case we do want to use the same set of arms, so we're going to leave that the same value. This visible item specifies what model file to use, and we want to use the bow. Notice how it did select an item parent underneath the right hand, but we actually want it to be underneath the left hand, so we're just going to swap that out. And then the last step is to add the bow animator controller for the first person item. Third person is extremely similar to first person, except, well, actually, yeah, very similar. So now we're going to add the model file, add which hand it's in, and then we're going to add the animator controller. Action type is shootable weapon, and the shootable weapon will be firing arrows. This last two fields, we're going to leave them as their default values, but to go in a little bit more detail about what they do is that if you wanted to use a pre-configured set of values for this particular item that you're creating, you could use those. So for example, if I set this to bow, any values that are within this bow profile will be transferred to the new item, and it applies to both the default values and then also any of the states and presets that you've set up for the bow item. And this just makes it a really quick way to build new items that have already been built before. But because we want to go through all the steps, I'm going to leave it at none. When I hit build, it will now add the bow. And when I hit play, we'll notice that the assault rifle is still positioned. And that's because the bow isn't being set to be positioned first. Actually, let me go back to this, and you'll notice how I have to switch to the bow, but the assault rifle has kind of an odd exit transition. So we want to change that for the assault rifle. This is only for the first person view that this does it, but the spring system, when it's playing the unequip animation, it will go to this position exit offset and use these values, and since it was 0, it was kind of off to the side and not what we wanted. So I just created a new position that's slightly below the normal position, the rest position. And so now when the unequipped plays, it should go to this position. Notice how for the exit offset, by default, it will have a X value. In this case, it goes to 30 for the rotation. So that's why the rotation looked good, but the position did not. So now when I switch to bow, the assault rifle looked good. So for bow, there's a few things that we want to do. The very first thing is we want it to be equipped first so that we don't have to keep transitioning to it. And we can do that by going to the item set manager and positioning the bow above the assault rifle item set. The item set manager is just a manager for determining which items are equipped, or what order things are equipped and what's equipped with what. So this is where you'd set up, for example, dual wielding. But for now, we're just going to leave it bow as the default, and I'm also going to set the state name to bow. The reason why I'm doing this is that when the bow item set gets activated, this state will then also be activated. This state is used in a couple of different places on the controller, and one of those places are under the character IK component. You'll see right here. And this has a slightly different values for the IK values or component. So when the bow item set is activated, this state will also be activated. So it's just a convenient way to change settings like that. Now when I hit play, we should see that the bow is positioned first. So that's good, and then I can switch to third person, and he's really flexible in third person. So the reason why that's occurring is because the bow, it uses a different movement set within the animator. This particular movement set that I'm going to be setting has a value of 2, and what it will do is it will recognize, hey, the movement set is 2, I should be playing this idle base animation, for example. So now when I hit play and I switch to third person, his left foot should be much further in front of the right foot. So that looks a lot better. Actually, let me go to the scene view. Now you can see, so now you can see that his left foot is really far ahead and his arms are positioned correctly. So that took care of that animation issue. The next thing that I want to take a look at is the positioning of the bow. And there's a couple of different positionings that I want to change. The first one that I want to change is this default first person offset value. Right now it's set to all zeros, but we want to change that to have a slightly different offset. And then we're also going to make sure we change this exit offset value, so when it transitions out, in this case, it will move down on the position axis, or the Y position axis. So now when I hit play, the arm should be in a better position, and it's just the bow actual item is now in not a good position. It's completely oriented wrong. So we can change that, similar to the assault rifle, by first going to the actual model file, and then I think I have these values copied. So yeah, let me just make sure. Yeah, that looks good for the bow for first person, and then I need to do something similar for third person. And I don't have these values copied, so I have to go ahead and enter them in manually. These values that I'm pasting in are taken from the demo scene, so we already went through the item positioning step and determined what are good values for this. And so now that I've set up the position and the rotation for the bow, it should look appropriate. It should look good for both first and third person. So that looks good. And then I switch to third person, and that looks good. So now the issue that I'm having is that we have no arrow. And we can add an arrow by going to this bow item, and then under shootable weapon, we want to specify that the arrow, let's see, under firing has a projectile, and we're going to use the already created arrow prefab. If we wanted to create a new prefab, we could go to the object manager and then create a new object type of type projectile, and then that will create the prefab for you and set up all the required components. We then want the arrow to be always visible. And this start layer, we want it to be on the overlay layer for first person, but on the ignore raycast layer for third person. In order to do that, we're going to set this state on the shootable weapon component, and we're going to use an existing preset that I've already created, and we'll take a look at that preset. But when it's in first person view, this first person state will be activated, and that means that it will then activate this preset. This preset sets this projectile start layer to 29, which is the overlay layer. So now when I hit play, the arrow will be on the overlay layer in first person view, and then it will be on the ignore raycast layer on third person view. So the arrow is positioned incorrectly, but let's take a look at the actual layer that it's on. So if I click on the arrow is underneath the fire point. We'll see that in first person, it's on the overlay layer. Now when I switch to third person, it switches to the ignore raycast layer. So that's a good demonstration of that state machine in action. Now you'll notice that the arrow is positioned incorrectly, and we want to do a couple of things with this. If we go ahead and start firing the arrow, or start aiming with the bow, you'll notice how the arrow doesn't change positions either, and the string just gets pulled back, but the arrow doesn't move with it. The reason for this is because right now the bow is positioned, or is parented to the left hand, and so the arrow is also parented to the left hand. This left hand doesn't move at all when he starts to aim, or starts to play the pullback animation, so we need to move the arrow to be positioned underneath the right hand. We can do that by creating a new game object underneath the right hand, and I'm going to call it arrow attachment. And this arrow attachment, let's see, I'm in third person right now, has a position value of what I'm typing in now, and these values were taken from the demo scene, and it was just retrieved from positioning it in play mode and determining what looked the best. So I got the position, and now I need the rotation. Okay, so that's for third person. And then we have to do something similar for first person by creating a new game object and positioning it underneath the right hand for first person. So let's go to create empty child and we'll call it arrow attachment. And these have a similar set of values as third person, but they're not exactly the same, so I can't just copy it. So there's the position. And the rotation. So now we've created this game object that we want the arrow parented to, but in this case it doesn't know that this game object exists, so we have to now assign it. We can do that assignment under these perspective properties. The first-person shootable weapon perspective properties define any transforms that are local to the first-person shooter item. And in this case, we have this fire point, and we also now want to assign this arrow attachment. What this will do is now when the fire point or the arrow gets equipped or spawns, the fire point will be parented to the arrow attachment. And so now, since the arrow is parented to the fire point, the arrow will be parented in the right hand. We can do something similar for third person. And if, for example, you were spawning these objects at runtime, and so you're doing runtime pickup, and you didn't have a reference to the characters game object at the start, you can use this ID and it will automatically find the ID based off of an object ID component. So that's actually how it's done in the demo scene. So if you look at the demo scene, you'll notice that this arrow attachment location is null, but the location ID has a value, I think it's 4, and it just uses that object ID component to search for which object. But we don't need to do that right now, so let's go ahead and hit play, and the arrow should be positioned a lot better. And notice how when I pull back the string, it also works. So that looks good. It should work as well for third person. Oh, looks like I got the values wrong for third person. Let me go ahead and look at the arrow attachment position again for third person. 0.0453489. Oh yeah, I got the rotation was wrong. So now in third person, it should look a little bit better. There we go. All right, so we got the arrow positioned and that's looking good. Now let's try firing. He pulls back, he doesn't fire at all. I let go of the mouse and it looks like he's actually stuck in this case. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that in this case, the bow, it doesn't use any use events for determining when, or doesn't use any use animation events for determining when to fire. It's instead based on a timer. So let's go to the shootable weapon and uncheck this, wait for animation event. We want it to be used right away, and then the complete event will occur 0.25 seconds later. This use basically specifies when the item is actually used, or when the count should go down, for example. It's when the weapon is actually fired. Then use complete is when the animation is done playing after it's been done fired. So now I also need to change the, I need to change the fire type, because it's a charge and hold fire type, meaning that I will pull back and I hold and then it waits for me to release the mouse. The minimum charge length is 0.2, maximum charge length is 0.5, so this means that the bow will not fire at all if you've only been holding the mouse for less than 0.2 seconds. It will play at semi-full strength, or it will fire at semi-full strength if you hold the mouse down between 0.2 and 0.5 seconds, and then it will fire at full strength if you hold the mouse down for more than 0.5 seconds. So let's go ahead and hit play, and now the arrow should fire. So I pull back and it does fire. Notice how after I fire though, the arrow doesn't get added again. The reason that is happening is because this clip size is set to 50. If I set this clip size to 1, that means that after every time he fires, the character will reload. So now we should have a working bow. So that looks a lot better. And we should be able to do something similar for third person. Perfect. So that's how you set up the bow.